photographed by the Apollo 15 astronauts on the moon.
Oh, wow.
So that was a real wow moment. And there are photographs from the Apollo 15 of this huge object on the back of the moon, which are still there up on the NASA site. You can go and see them.
Right.
And it's about 4 kilometers long. Like, it's huge. It's an enormous thing, which people don't like talking about.
How far can you remote view? I mean, obviously you can do timelines. You can go into
Anywhere, anywhen.
anywhere,
There is
any
no
place.
limit to the distance that we can remote view.
Wow.
So we have an ability that's quite weak, but has enormous range. I mean, it has unlimited range from what we can determine. Um, there was back in I think it was about 74. Again, Russell Targ and others at Stanford Research Institute were trying to find ways of getting around debunkers. So there were always skeptics and debunkers saying, "Oh, this is just nonsense," or, it was a joke. So there was a Pioneer satellite, I think, heading to Jupiter, if I remember
Yep.
right.
Yep.
So one of the people at SRI was a guy called Ingo Swann. So Ingo is known affectionately as the father of remote viewing. I mean, he was an amazing natural psychic, but he's also the guy who really knew his own process, and he crafted the protocol in many ways that then was adopted and used by the military over in Fort Meade on the East Coast.
Yep.
And so they said, well, look, what if we got Ingo to remote view Jupiter before Pioneer gets there, and he finds something that nobody's ever seen before? Like, how cool would that be?
Yep.
So again, they asked Ingo to do a remote viewing session, didn't tell him what the target was, didn't give him any information. He starts describing this object. It's in space, it's big, it's round, it's planet-like. And he says, and there is a single line of ring, like a ring of rocks around this object, this planetary body.
Right.
And he said it's not Saturn, because I know Saturn has a deep set of rings around it. So this is a single ring of rocks around it. And they went, oh, that's interesting. We've never come across that before. So they took that information to people like Carl Sagan and other astronomers and said, we're doing this remote viewing stuff. We've got this information about Jupiter. What do you think? And they went, guys, like, this is nonsense. There's no rings around Jupiter.
Right.
And they totally dismissed it. And a couple of months later, then, when Pioneer flew past Jupiter for the first time, one of the first photographs it took was of the single ring of rocks that's in orbit around Jupiter. So before we knew anything about that, Ingo described it before the satellite arrived. So it proves that it wasn't some form of telepathy, as some people believe it is. And it wasn't his imagination. I mean, he found this stuff and was able to describe it.
Yep.
So, yeah, as far as we know, there's no limit to how far we can remote view.
And what about people's bodies and like doctors or health situations? Or you had talked about actually influencing people's subconscious?
So there are medical applications for remote viewing. You can view. I mean, you can view somebody's body looking for problems or faults, or to try and identify where there are problems. Like, we don't diagnose because you're not allowed to diagnose if you're not a medical practitioner.
Right.
But we find information that can be brought to a medical practitioner and go, this is what we're finding. What do you think of this? Is this the basis for doing some kind of other investigation or scan or whatever? So there's a form of remote viewing called medical applications, and it's fairly advanced. As you become more and more experienced with this, you realize that you do start picking up information from the target and from people at the target. You start picking up on their thoughts, their beliefs, their perceptions. You even pick up their perceptions about you.
Oh, wow.
And when you get into the very advanced stages, there are ways of literally having one-to-one conversations with the subconscious. So one of the projects that the Husick Group worked recently was to help somebody identify a birth parent, to locate a birth parent in the US. Oh. And they managed to do that. They combine it with other investigative processes, but they were able to provide information that allowed investigators to focus in on an area, and they actually found the birth mother. And as part of that process, this method of talking to the subconscious was used to help identify and locate where the person was by getting them to describe things that were around themselves. So, and I mean, that's just one tip of the iceberg as to what you can do with this.
Are government agencies still using remote viewers within their programs, whether it be like investigations or research? Or
there are, as far as we know, and I've spoken to some of the ex-military guys about this. So they said, we're intelligence officers. We look for indicators. There are no indicators to suggest that they are continuing to use remote viewing. Because if you think about it, prior to 95, there was a very liberal approach to ESP and psychic phenomena, and people were really interested in this stuff.
Right.
But come the mid 90s, there was a 180-degree shift in thinking within the administration in terms of the Christian right coming in, and that was starting to influence Republican politics quite heavily. And nobody wanted to be associated with this psychic woo-woo stuff.
Right.
It was a career killer. And also they now had much better intelligence gathering systems like satellites, cyber hacking, types of microphones that you could pick up conversations.
Probably costs a few more dollars, right?
Pardon?
Probably costs a few more dollars.
Costs a few more dollars, but then there are plenty of companies willing to offer those products.
Right.
That's why you have budgets. But the thing was, the shift in thinking was such that it suddenly became a hot potato. Nobody wanted to hold on to this. However, there are quite a number of police departments around the US who have had members of the departments trained in CRV. And they've used them for things like cold cases where you're looking for missing evidence or extra evidence or missing persons.
Yep.
With Husick Group, Gail Husick, who runs that, regularly takes on missing persons cases, and in many cases we do those as a pro bono public service. But again, it's not to find the person; it's to get the information that can be given to law enforcement, that they can then work with it. So that's why she'll only work through law enforcement agencies, because they know how to handle the information and what to do with it. Because if you think of a situation where your sister goes missing, and you go to a remote viewer, and the remote viewer says, "Well, I'm getting this perception of this. There's a biological person. They're human. It's a female. She's kind of teenager age. She's injured. She's hurt. She's crying. She's cold." And they describe this location that looks like this sort of ruined castle tower. And you go, "Oh my God, I know exactly where that is."
Right.
So are you going to go down to the police with that information and say, "Look, we've got this information and we think you should look into this"? Are you going to get in the car and drive to the location because you know where it is? You're going to go and save her. Right? That's the natural tendency. But in doing so, you will then you might disrupt the crime that's in place, or that's in progress. You might disturb a crime scene. You might contaminate evidence so that the people who are doing the crime can't actually be convicted because of your interference, because you misused the information that you were given. So that's why you've got to take a very professional attitude to this kind of work, because it's serious stuff. Big boys games, big boys rules.
Yeah.
You've got to be very, very careful with this kind of thing. It's not a toy. And it's used in situations that can be very, very serious.
And I've seen some pieces of video about remote viewing and UFOs, different life forms and things like that. Tell me, because I saw one of your segments where you were talking about, friendly life forms and how people are using this, but you're saying a lot of times you don't use that because you don't get any feedback. But how are people using it with looking for other life forms?
So there are two questions there. So I'll answer the first one.
Okay.
First. So the reference to the friendly, unfriendly, that came from a conversation that my trainer had with us, where he was asked to because of his security clearances, which were very, very high, he was asked to do a review of the information that was out there about these so-called alien, what's the word I'm looking for? Experiences that people had, contacts.
Yeah.
And he said basically you can break them down into four types. So on one half of the square you've got friendly and you've got unfriendly. And then across the top you've got psychic and not psychic. So what he said was that the friendly, not psychic, really like us because we're trading with them for technology. The unfriendly, not psychic, don't like us and they tend to stay away.
Right.
The unfriendly psychic are quite worried about us because what they realize is that while we have a very limited psychic ability, we have unlimited range. Their psychic ability is quite strong, but the range is very limited. So the classic case of the UFO and the beam and the cow being taken up, or you're standing
Right.
there and you lift it up, that is a psychic effect. And if you run around the field, they've got to get you in the beam in order to lift you up. Right? It doesn't just automatically happen.
Right.
So, but the friendly psychics are really glad to meet us because they realize that while our ability is quite weak, our range is weak. With ability training and development, they may be able to help us to become quite strong. And just like here, we have geopolitics between the US, North Korea, China, Russia. Out there it's exactly the same. I mean, the universe is teeming with life. And there are alliances, there are friends, there are enemies, there are those that don't care. There are traders. Just the same kind of cross-section of activities that we have here, you have out there. And so it's sort of exopolitics. There are those that want us on their side, there are those that don't want us to develop off the planet. So that's what
there's lots of life forms out there. So I'm sure we don't even know a fraction of what's exists.
No, we don't. No. So
and I've watched some videos with some other people that do remote viewing, and they were talking about the fact that a lot of people, maybe aliens or other life forms, are like, well, we'll just leave them to themselves because we have our own limited view, like a lot of the masses do.
Yeah. Well, so here's another thing, right? So we live in this illusion that we are physical beings, right? That I, Paul, am having this, that I am Paul and I'm doing this, and
right.
then you and you're doing that.
Right.
But the more you do this kind of work, you realize we're not physical beings, we're energetic beings.
Right.
Who are using this meat taxi, as I call it, to have a physical experience. Because the only way we can experience this physical reality is by having this vehicle that allows us to interact with it in some way. But the ego gets in the way, and the ego convinces us that we are actually singular entities. But anyone that's done any kind of energy work realizes very quickly we're all connected at some level. Even psychologists will talk about the collective unconscious, but it's a reference to something much more. So we're looking at the wrong part of the body. The Monroe Institute over in Virginia, out there, they teach people how to have out-of-body experiences because they realize you can induce these effects using binaural beat technology, hemisync, this kind of thing.
Right.
And, when you've had those kind of experiences, you go, holy crap, like I am more than my physical body. So if we constantly look for bipedal humanoid life forms, that's only a very, very narrow range of people or of beings, of life forms.
Right.
I mean, there are life forms out there that we can't even begin to imagine. But
do you feel like, have you ever seen the movie, have you ever seen the TV show Sense8? That is...
Not yet.
The Wachowskis, they did The Matrix.
No, it's on my watch list, or to watch list.
Yeah. I've been watching through it over the last week just because somebody had mentioned it. And you had talked about timelines. Do you feel as we're all connected to different sorts of energy, do you feel that there's multiple parallel realities that are happening at the same time? Like as you and I are talking, are we also, does our energy exist somewhere else where this is just maybe a small piece of a bigger piece of the puzzle?
Like a huge fractal. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you think like you can move into alternate realities. The best example I ever came across of that was an explanation by Fred Alan Wolf in one of his books on quantum physics and shamanism.
Right.
And he said, if you imagine that this, where are we? Spare me 1 second. So this pencil is a timeline, right? So we've got height, width, dimension, motion. Okay, this is our timeline. Our 3 dimensions, right, and our 4th dimension of time are operating along here, this timeline. But if you have a shamanic experience or any kind of esoteric experience, what will happen is you might come here, you have your experience, and you go off on a different timeline.
Different dimension or plane, right?
Yeah. So you can go off in this direction. You could spend years out here having an amazing experience and come back to this same point on your timeline and continue as if you never left, right? Because it's just a different timeline.
Wow.
But you don't age because you're on this timeline. You know, then you can get timelines across. So you can have something moving on one timeline, crossing. So a lot of the classic UFO sightings where you see the UFO come in and like suddenly zip appears out of nowhere and then seems to hover for a bit and then zip, it's gone again. You know, and experts go, oh, they can't possibly survive the G-forces involved in this. They can't if they're on our timeline. But if they're moving through time rather than through space,
right,
then they're plodding along on their timeline, and we only start to see them when they start to approach our timeline. So they suddenly appear out of nowhere, and then they seem to hover or hang around a little bit, and then they're gone again. It's because the timelines have crossed.
Wow.
And the little bit that we saw was them tiptoeing past us as they, but the illusion of great speed and motion was created by the crossing of the 2 timelines.
Wow.
So we think about moving in space. They think about moving in time. You know, and we're now starting to think in terms of folding space in order to move between 2 different points in space. So rather than trying to physically move ourselves, we're now thinking of bending space so that we can simply move from here to here rather than move from there to there. And that's what warp drives are all about. And the whole Star Trek thing, and you know, warp coils and all of that. So that work is going on at the moment. There are different forms of propulsion being looked at that could generate those kind of feelings.
So there's people in technology right now being worked on with time travel and molecular kind of disorganization.
Rather than time travel, I'd call it faster than light travel.
Faster than light travel.
Yeah, because they appear to jump from one place to another. But what they're actually doing is they're just connecting 2 different points in space by bending space. It's you know, it's all there in the physics.
You told me about the realities, and this might sound really funny, way off, but I remember years back I went to the dentist and I got like some nitrous, and it was a really trippy experience. And what was so trippy, and you know, it could have been the gas or whatever it may be, but after I got out, I actually started journaling and writing down the experience. I probably have it in one of my books somewhere.
Yeah.
But it felt as if like I got this vision that like what we're in right now is like this really tiny dream of like a much more galactic, bigger picture. And so it was almost like through my tooth or my mouth, it was kind of like there was like this big realization after I got out that what we're in right now is really more of a dream than reality. And there's a much bigger, there's just a much, I mean, we're talking gargantuous. We're talking, this is a little fraction of what we're really connected to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would concur with that.
Yeah.
Um, we
No, I got out and I mean, have you ever had an experience where you just came back and you were just like, it felt like you just went through a time warp?
yeah. Not to remote viewing, but I have had experiences of no time, of
Right.
experiencing no time, and not knowing how long I was in the experience, because there was no way of measuring it. That doesn't make sense to a lot of people, you know. And
Right.
it's, you know, like we call it, it's like a location joke, like you had to be there. Um, it's
I probably had a little bit of an outer body experience. I remember actually hearing the doctors talking and I was not like fully there.
yeah,
And, but I mean, I don't know, I came out and I was writing for a while. I was just like, I had to journal it because I was like, the vision that I got in my mind was very eye opening.
sure, yeah,
So,
and it can be very clear and very lucid
yeah.
and very accurate too, which a lot of skeptics don't like.
Right. Yeah, no, the whole timeline thing is so interesting because if you look at time and what we know of it, you know, we can only perceive what we believe ourselves and what we think is real.
Yeah,
And you look at people like Tesla, or you look at any great inventor, maybe it's Albert Einstein or, you know, a bunch of the scientists before, you know, it always takes somebody that believes in something. Everybody else thinks they're nuts
yeah,
and that they've lost their rocker. And then what happens is that becomes reality. And now everybody is standing behind that person and say, yeah, I knew that was the case. So
yeah.
where is reality as you know it, as far as what's possible, and what are some of the things that have opened up your mind to really look further or seek more information? Because I know there's a lot of people walking around the street that are like, okay, you guys talk your funny talk.
Mm.
I'll just focus on what's in front of me.
Well, one of the ways it shows up is manifestation. You know, manifesting, deciding what you actually want,
Right.
and again, getting out of your own way, getting your belief systems out of the way. And I think our biggest problem is that we're basically programmed from the womb in many ways by the thoughts and beliefs of our closest and our caregivers. You know, so psychologists who work with trauma will tell you that, you know, we establish our primary beliefs to be about ourselves, our safety in the world, our relationship to money by the age of 2 years old. Because you have no critical frontal cortex here to filter the information. You know, so everything that you tell a child, they assume is true and they will absorb it like a sponge. So you might not be saying anything to your child, but they're picking up everything. They're picking up all the nuances, all the signals, all the subtle reactions you have, your body language to other people, to situations. And that becomes part of their internal programming. You know, and for many people, getting that programming out of the way is a big part of the battle in growing and evolving. But the more you do, the easier it is to create your own reality, because you start to move from a place of dictation or filtering because of your belief systems to a place of choice, where you choose what you want and choose how you want to be and choose the environment you want to live in. And the world has a funny way of making that happen for you when you focus on that. But I'll tell you one story which has always fascinated me, and it came from the early days of the military unit. One of the viewers is a guy called Mel Riley, and Mel was he actually did the first operational remote viewing in the unit. But one of the stories is they were doing a practice target. Practice target was a battlefield. It was somewhere like Gettysburg or somewhere like an American Civil War battlefield. So he goes into his session. He starts having this experience where the perceptions are so strong, he thinks he's now there at the battlefield. And it is so clear that, you know, he's perceiving all this stuff happening around him and the chaos in the battle. And there's this young kid who's wounded and dying and calling out for his mother. So Mel, who's a very empathic individual, stayed with this kid seemed to be able to see him. So he stayed with this kid and basically held him, because this poor kid, you know, probably 18, wounded in a battlefield hundreds of miles from the small town where he grew up, which he probably never left in his teen years, is now dying on a foreign location, no family around him, and thinks there's nobody there. So Mel stayed with him and basically comforted him as he passed over. So Mel came out of that session, and that was quite an experience, and nobody had ever come across this happening before in the unit. But they realized that at certain points you can become so sucked into the target, the location, that the perceptions are coming in such a flow. It's like being there. You're not having an out-of-body experience. You're not bilocating. Your subconscious is creating this virtual experience, which is so real you believe you're there. You forget about the room. You forget about the table. You forget about your monitor. You're there. You're at Gettysburg. And so he was helping this kid. So as he got up to walk away from the table, somebody said, "Oh, Mel, did you hurt yourself?" And he said, "No." He said, "Well, there's blood on your shirt." And when he looked, there was blood on his shirt. So opened the shirt. There's no wound. There's no injury. They checked with everybody else. Nobody else in the unit had hurt themselves or injured themselves that day. They were working in an office. And so they actually ran blood tests on the blood that was on the shirt.
Oh my goodness.
Nobody in the unit had the same blood type. There was no match. So where did the blood come from? Maybe the question should be, when did the blood come from? Don't know. But, when you start doing this kind of stuff, as anybody who works with energy work, again, says, you change the quantum space. You change the qualities of space and time around yourself when you get into very, very deep work like this. And, stuff can manifest physically. There's a guy called Stephen Baud who wrote a book which is called The Case of the Gold Leaf Lady. And again, he is a guy who investigates all this kind of work, and he says there is this woman in the US who at times her skin will break out in what literally looks like gold. Now they tested it, and it's a form of fool's gold. It's a form of brass. Right? It's brass. But they've done all the checks, right? So she's not swallowing this stuff and excreting it to her pores. She's not spraying it on herself in any way. She's there in a controlled environment, and suddenly this stuff just appears on her skin.
Wow. Right?
So, we can manifest things under certain conditions, and we're only scratching the surface, really, because as we move out of this whole Newtonian way of looking at the world and hard physics, and get deeper and deeper into the quantum world, and now we're getting deeper and deeper into neuroscience and how neuroscience works, and we're getting deeper and deeper then into the concept of non-local phenomena, and also the effect of consciousness and intention on all of this. Right. So we're opening up whole new realms of discovery and exploration with this, which ironically many indigenous cultures already know about, because they were doing this stuff for thousands of years before we tried to put a system on.